What's going on, Packers fans? Aaron Nagler here, joined by Justis once again. How are you, sir? It's another great day in this land of ours.
Sure is. Yeah, I get to watch. I told you before we were coming on. I'm gonna go to the Blazers Bucks game later tonight.
Love
Hopefully,
that West Coast swing.
the
You get the
Blazers
folks
can
in the
keep it
seats.
competitive.
Uh, Maybe if you're lucky, you see a good game. Absolutely. I did want to talk to you about your piece about Rich Bisaccia, and it was kind of interesting to see how you led in that piece, saying that you were surprised that there apparently are Packers fans who thought there was a possibility that Rich Bisaccia would not only not get a contract extension, but be let go outright. And I'm with you in the sense that I don't find the news surprising. I did find it disappointing how upset that news made a lot of Packers fans. And I thought you laid out a number of really good kind of points and made a bit of a case for why Matt LaFleur went this route. Now, putting beside the fact that, I know Tom Silverstein in his piece for the Journal Sentinel reported that there were rumblings that Bisaccia might retire this offseason. And that certainly, does make you wonder, well, why are you handing a guy a retirement check? Like, if he had almost a foot out the door, why the need for an extension other than to just, make sure he's not a lame duck? But I do find that piece from Tom's reporting kind of interesting.
Well, it's the only leverage you have when you're under contract, right? It's like the Sean Payton stuff where he's like, all right, well, this team's not going to get turned around. We're not going to infuse it with
Right.
money. I'm going to retire and I'll come back in like 2 years or whatever. It is a piece of leverage. And I don't know how serious that is. I mean, he's like, isn't he late 50s, early 60s? Like,
Yeah,
he's
I want to
not.
say, but what's fascinating to me, and I kind of talked about this a bit on my chat yesterday, is like he went in essentially a 1 year period from last year. There were rumblings, oh, he might start getting looks at head coaching gigs, to he might retire. That just feels like a
Well,
swift shift.
there were even reports. One thing that people don't understand about the interview process is that like you don't have to report everything. You don't have to announce it and blast it on your like Twitter
Your Twitter
feed.
account.
Yeah, exactly. Like
Right.
when the Packers hired Halfley, that's the first we had heard of Halfley even be
Literally.
halfway interested, right?
Yeah.
So, there were reports that Bisaccia was kind of like a surprise candidate for the Cowboys. That I mean, they're long ties there,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So I don't know how serious the retirement stuff is. I do wonder if it was just him trying to leverage, money, because that's
Right.
basically the only way you could leverage money when you're under contract. I also don't like they were always going to kind of like extend him. That's the way the NFL works. Unless you're working for Jerry Jones, they don't
Right.
let coaches play on the last year of the contract. It doesn't really make sense to me. College, it makes more sense because at least you're having to recruit guys, and they're like, I don't know if you're going to be here when I
Be
like
here for
show up
long
on
term.
campus.
Right. Yeah.
Not sure that matters at the NFL level. But the other thing that I thought was interesting was the what was it, like game clock manager or whatever the thing, whatever
Well, yeah.
modifier they
Like
mentioned.
I said on Twitter, I think that Silverstein, and he hasn't clarified this because he just doesn't live online like the rest of us. But, I think he was saying that as a matter of, well, this is one of his duties. And we know that, LaFleur has talked about leaning on Bisaccia for in game stuff as the assistant head coach. And, I'm glad you brought that up because it's funny to see the reaction. And I think a lot of it stems from a really disappointing final regular season game where you did have a fake punt return for a touchdown, or a misdirection return for a touchdown on the punt unit, and then you have the lasting image of LaFleur and Bisaccia discussing on the sideline prior to completely botching the end of that game on the offensive side of the ball, as far as when to take a timeout, what you should do as far as trying to get a first down, and apparently not knowing, at least Matt not knowing, that you're within range. Your kicker can make it from here. So I think you combine all of that as kind of the most recent image in a lot of fans' heads. I understand people kind of wringing their hands a little bit, but I do think Connor Lewis is clearly the kind of guy up in the box, right? Who LaFleur talks about quite often when it comes to managing the game, timeouts, and things of that nature. I do think Bisaccia is part of that mix, but I don't think this is some kind of bequeathing him a new title or anything like that.
No, and even like the AHC title, right? Assistant head coach. Like when they
Right.
asked Matt about it, they were like, what's different? And he's like, pay raise, like, you know.
Right.
So I
Right.
I do think that like the game management stuff could be a response to that Bears game, right?
Possibly. Right.
Like I know people look at that and they're like, why would you give Bisaccia more power if that situation had? Why would you give him less if Matt didn't know that they were within like that should be
Right.
part of the conversation. And I know
Maybe it's part of emboldening him to contribute more in that
right,
regard.
exactly. So I'm not really worried about that. I think that all makes sense. I think people's and this was, most of the piece really was like Bisaccia's units have gotten better. I understand they're not
See, I'm
elite.
glad you said this because it's funny. People are just, again, talking about how we have these terrible special teams. And I will admit, it's not like they've been banner units. I'm not sitting
Yeah,
here
yeah,
saying
yeah.
that Rich Bisaccia has really come in and done an amazing job turning around the special teams units outside of the fact that, I did watch a number of special teams coordinators come through Green Bay in the last decade plus, and those units were mostly terrible. These units, from my eyes, and I'd love to get go through the piece you wrote here, they've been, for the most part, not all the way, but for the most part, pretty damn competent.
Yeah,
And I know that's not Titletown talk, but that's improvement from where we were.
I'll start this on the front end because I think this paints the picture of how I view the position
Okay.
entirely. And I've
Right.
like I was a special teams coordinator at the high school level, totally different rules.
Right.
Doesn't really apply here, but it's like something I'm at least vaguely familiar with. Talked to a bunch of dudes who coached in the NFL and college level, and various special teams roles. Before when I was basically told that I was going to get that job, I don't really think that the kickers and punters are really the responsibility of the special teams coordinator or returners. I think those guys, for the most part, you're paying money to get those guys like any other, star
Right.
position where
Yep.
you're really
They're an
trying to get,
asset. Right.
where you're really trying to develop, and where you see the difference with special teams coordinators is developing those other guys. So I'm talking about the protection units, right? And the coverage units. And the protection units, when's the last time we saw blocks?
Knock on whatever, but yeah,
Right. I
no, it's
mean,
been good
very different
and solid.
than than the Niners game, right?
God,
Um,
yes.
and then and the coverage unit, I think they've done better. I know, there's been some penalties and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, that happens. You don't want it to happen, but like we don't have Ty Summers out there with like the turning radius of an oil tanker,
Oh my
right? Like we
gosh.
have guys who can actually run in space, tackle in space, all that stuff. And I think that helps on defense. And when you look at kind of Bisaccia's ass as far as like roster construction goes, right? They basically the big thing that you want to understand, right? They basically eliminated the non-returner receiver role for special teams, right? You
Right.
don't see I mean, Malik Heath can do it a little bit, but I think that's because he's Malik Heath and he already
He's
made
a
the
he's a
roster.
bit of a dog, and that's why.
Right. Like
Yes,
when
exactly.
Samari
That's why he's
Toure
in the
was
league. Right.
when Samari Toure was, the sixth receiver or whatever, like he wasn't doing the same stuff Malik Heath was doing.
Yep.
So they're asking for more defensive backs, and that hasn't hurt the team. I mean, you're talking Corey Ballantyne, Katano Ladapo, Zane Anderson. Whenever they were asked to play on the defensive side, they were ready to play defense. Like those guys were,
Absolutely. Both
I mean,
Anderson
maybe,
and Oladapo came in and played really well, actually.
yeah. Well, I liked what Ballantyne did, not this past season, the season
2 seasons
before. I
ago,
mean,
definitely.
for like a corner 4 or 5 or whatever the hell he was,
Yep.
like that was pretty
Thrust into
impressive
a
for him to do
starting
that off
role
the
for, like,
bench.
a stretch of weeks. Yeah, no doubt.
So if we go like unit by unit, right? Protection units, better. Coverage units, better. Punter, we have our guy in Daniel Whalen. Kicker, they didn't have any money. I cannot stress this enough. They did not have any money the past 2 seasons to spend on a kicker. That's why they went with Anders Carlson. The two guys who are the only two guys who were projected to go in that draft that Carlson got drafted, right? Went in the top like 115.
Mhm.
And Moody went in the third, and it was very shortly after that Ryland ended up going.
Yep.
Moody, they're ready to burn him at the stake
Yeah,
right
they
now in
are.
San Francisco. Ryland is already got cut from New England after a single season. So like their only other option was really going into the UDFA market. they only got McManus because he was cheap, because he was coming off
Yes.
of, you know, the lawsuit that ended
Yep.
up getting settled right before they signed him. So I think you have to remember that a lot of the kicking woes, which was even this year when people used like the season long statistics, I'm like, that's counting the Narvison stuff, man. Like, I
Yes.
don't care about like the missed kicks that Narvison had. He clearly was not good enough. They didn't have the money until you know, McManus, who was signed for a whole lot more previously, right? Coming off of the
Oh,
Jaguars
big.
and
I
free
mean, he
agency.
got a free agent deal for the
He got a
Commanders,
running back
right?
contract.
Yeah.
Yeah, he got a
Right.
running back contract. And you know, if he wasn't available, you probably still have Narvison, but that has nothing to do with Bisaccia. That has to do
Bisaccia,
with
right.
the cap situation. I think if there's a legitimate gripe, right? The kick return stuff, I'm willing to throw that out right now just because I don't know what the kick return rules are going to look like next season. And we always knew that the way that, again, I've worked with XFL 2020. I understand kind of like, what do you call it? Incentivize how we
Right.
incentivize these rules.
Yep.
Until they move it to the 35, we're going to get a ton of touchbacks.
Exactly.
And
Yep.
I've been saying that since they announced it. It's one of the reasons why the Packers voted no against the kick return rules.
The only
I think
team
they
to
were
do
one of
so, if
three.
I remember right.
I think the Bengals did, and
Oh, that's right.
maybe
Mike
someone
Brown
else.
always votes no.
But so the kick returner stuff, I'm not really worried about it. Punt returner, if you want to make the argument the team should invest more in a punt returner, I'm not going to blame you. I will remind you, dude, Amari Rogers was back there and he could not cover a ball.
Well, okay, I'm glad you brought that up. Now, that's something that I get intermittently when people are complaining about Bisaccia, the fact that it took the disaster of Amari Rogers repeatedly looking inept for them to get desperate enough to put Keyshawn Nixon back there and then kind of find something, right? And that wasn't proactive on Bisaccia's part. That was just desperation. I understand that frustration, but at the same time, it's not like, to your point, like, you're supposed to be throwing resources at it and assets at it, and they do that all throughout training camp. As far as they have, like, not every running back, but I remember Aaron Jones was back there returning punts in training camp. You know, they're running through a number of guys, and if you throw a starter out there, like I've seen it with Jaden Reed, people get all upset. Well, do you want somebody with talent back there or not? So I understand that, or like that complaint when it comes to, well, he just stumbled upon Keyshawn Nixon. I understand that, but Keyshawn Nixon was in the mix. It's not like they just threw him out there in the middle of the season.
Yeah, and you know, there's previous ties there too, right? Rich coached them in Vegas and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, the punt returner question, I'd be willing to concede that. I will say, how much do you think the front office has an impact on who plays? That's a thing that happens in the NFL, man. Like,
yes.
Okay, there is.
That's a bigger conversation that we can have this offseason. No, I'm 100%, man. I've been talking about this.
So I'll bring up an
example.
I'll bring up an example that I know of. There was a player picked in the top 100 in the NFL draft this past year. The general manager wanted him to be a starter, so he did not add any more talent.
Unbelievable.
To the did I already mention this
that room?
To the defensive tackle room.
Got it.
The coaching staff then, as a point to the general manager, just would not activate the guy on game days. By the way, both of those guys got fired. Their names are Doug Peterson and Trent Baalke. You'd be shocked. A political battle involving Trent Baalke.
Unbelievable. Baalke? No. The hell.
And Peterson, who like got ran out of Philadelphia.
Yeah.
It was Mason Smith, the LSU guy. But so like that stuff happened. So I don't know. Like
you can't always assume they're in lockstep. I think you've seen that play out in Green Bay.
Think about how Rodgers talked about, or Aaron Rodgers talked about Amari Rodgers, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he was 100%. Like, what does he do here? I don't really know. Like,
he's returning kicks for us, is all I know. I think that was the quote.
I think, I think the front office was like, we got to get this guy on the field because we thought we saw something in him and we drafted him high. So we want you to use him. So again, I'm not sure that matters. I know people were also brought up that like Anders Carlson, like Bisaccia was like saying nice things about him in interviews and stuff like that.
Right.
What do you want the guy to do?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
you really think
Yeah.
that was his guy? The guy who was projected to be undrafted got picked in the third round because there was a lot of retired kickers that year too, right? There were a lot of
Mhm.
teams that needed kickers, which pushed Ryland and Moody up into the top 115. And like, no,
Well,
man,
I
like,
think and I think he's being honest as far as, like, having coached his brother and,
yeah,
obviously he's familiar with the kid and what's he gonna do? And that's the other thing that always kinda drives me nuts is people are like, "Well, he loves the guy," and all this other stuff because of all these things we heard him say at a press conference. What do you think is happening at these press conferences? That's what I don't understand. People try to kind of ascribe like, this is clearly the meaning of no, man, this is all performance art. Like, they're
they're
not up
like
there gonna be telling the truth
they'll throw you a bone every once in a while,
every once in a while.
but unless they're frustrated, honestly, they're just trying not to make headlines that will
Right.
then impact
Negative
their day to
headlines.
day. Like,
Exactly.
so
Boring by design is what McCarthy used to call it,
yeah,
and he achieves that obviously. But yes, 1000%.
yeah. So again, I understand that the special teams is in the 20s and all that stuff in these rankings. People expected it to be more. The structure of the team was not built to support special teams, right? From a roster construction standpoint, they are moving towards that. The coverage unit is getting better. The uh, protection
Protection
unit
unit
is getting
getting
better.
better. Yep.
I think we have our kicker. Like, we have so much money that, like, why wouldn't you
We'll
just
see if
bring
they pay
back
him, right?
McManus,
Yep.
Waylon? I think we have our punter.
Yep.
Our kick returner, I'm not really worried about that situation. If you want to say we should be better at punt returner, I'm not going to complain. And then the long snapper stuff, I haven't watched. I'm gonna be on, like, I long snapped in high school. I've taught high school kids how to long snap. It's a very different game because you can free release down the field. Same thing in
Yep.
college football.
Right.
You're not asked to be in protection and stuff. I haven't seen enough like long snapper film to be able to gauge like exactly where Orzic ranks. I would guess it's probably a little bit below average based off of just how Waylon how Waylon has to adjust sometimes to either short snaps or long
Get up
snaps.
or out. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think it's horrendous, but like if you want to say get better at the long snapper position, I also wouldn't complain. I also don't have a name for you there, right?
Right.
They brought in the Wisconsin kid who was supposed to be like the number one
And he was
long
in and out
snapper.
all summer.
He
Yeah.
was in it. He was in and out. He signed on a practice squad for 1 week with the Jacksonville Jaguars. No one's heard of him since. So
Yep.
like, it's not easy to like identify long snappers because there's not that many people who do it, right? The college game has legitimately probably the biggest difference between the college and NFL game is probably what you can do with the snappers on punts. Because in college, you can free release immediately. In the NFL, you have to wait until the ball is actually punt. So only the outside gunners are able to go down the field. That's why pro punting, where guys are just sitting back there and knocking the ball deep, is so different than in college, where they have all these rugby guys who you grab the ball, you have a
Oh, and they can
shield of
have.
3 offensive linemen in the
Yeah. They have. I
backfield.
was just gonna
You
say. Right. Exactly.
you roll to the right because you're trying to hold on to the ball as long as possible so that your entire front line can go downfield, and then you kick it, right? Like, it's a very different game. So I honestly, like, the units have improved. Why are we going to fire this guy? Plus,
No one wants to hear it. No one wants to hear it.
the
You
last
know.
point, the last point.
Yeah.
It's not their money, and I understand. And I also understand the point where
Right.
people are like, well, the Packers don't have an ownership group that's just, money grabbing, just like stuff in their pockets. So, like, why don't they spend all this money?
There's no cap on coaches.
But coaching staff, like,
Justice.
when you fire a coach, you have to pay him out. I don't
Yep.
know if people realize that. That's fully guaranteed money, right? If you fire a coach, you're paying him out, and then you have to hire a new guy. So when you fire Menenga and then you
Go
hire
to Drayton.
internally
Right.
because you have to go cheap and sign Drayton, that's a response to that. When you fire McCarthy and you're like, well, we just paid Pettin a ton of money. How about we build the coaching staff around Pettin? Like, that's what ends up happening, guys. So firing Bisaccia, I don't know if you could have gotten a Rizzy if they would have wanted to. They didn't want to spend the money on Rizzy the first time. What makes you think they want to pay?
I'm glad you brought that up.
And
I
Rizzi?
want to plant this flag right now. It is true. Rizzi wanted a farm, like no question about it. But Rizzi also asked for that because his family didn't want to live in Green Bay. That's the part that never gets talked about. All right, so there are a couple levels to that story.
Wives are important.
They
Wives
are.
are
They
so
are
incredibly important. Yeah. So generally, I think I view Rich as relatively neutral. Like I'm not super excited about what he's done.
Yep.
There has been improvement. I'm certainly not willing to fire him at this point. And I'm just surprised there's such strong feelings really either way. Like
I'm not surprised
marginally
the Packers fan
improved.
base, but
They've marginally improved, and in Green Bay where it was so bad and it was so deep rooted into like even roster construction and how they view developing young players and stuff like that. That like, guys, this is progress. This is progress. I don't know if you guys realize that.
That it's so funny you bring that up because I made this argument with someone on Blue Sky, and the instant response was, "Well, that's just Titletown, isn't it? Like, just be competent." It's like, how do you get to a championship squad? Well, you have to improve from the dreck that you were kind of lying in for, what, 2 decades? I mean, they legit have not been good on teams forever.
Again, if we had maybe a different punt returner and we ignore the McManus stuff.
Right.
Or not the McManus stuff, the Narvison stuff. Mm-hmm. I legitimately don't know if we're having this conversation. I understand that, Keyshawn fumbled. Are we throwing Keyshawn out because he fumbled in a playoff game? He made 2 first-team All-Pros back-to-back. Mm-hmm. Like, I understand you could be frustrated, but like just destroying the entire process that got us here because you didn't like the result of the opening play of a playoff game doesn't really make sense to me.
And here's the other component, and I talked about this a lot yesterday on my chat. Let's say the whole special teams aspect of it is a wash, right? To your point, like it's net neutral at this point, I would say, and I agree with your assessment there. But to me, this kind of extension is more about how Matt values Bisaccia in the building, as far as not just what he does in regards to being a special teams coordinator, but you talk about the assistant head coach and that being kind of, oh, well, give him a title and some more money. That is true. But I also think that he's acknowledged that Rich touches a lot of different areas in the building and on his staff, and he values that. Whatever that is, Matt values his input and his presence on his staff. So, I knew there'd be like vocal kind of fans being upset about it, but to me, I get where Matt is coming from here. Having just talked about not wanting to be a guy who hires and fires people every offseason.
Yeah.
Last year.
Yeah. And I think that makes a lot more sense too when people realize that like you don't like play calling head coaches don't just roll up on game day and the only difference is that like they're calling plays. Like they have to be prepared a lot. And that's like Stanovich's job. I'm sure so much of it is just like preparing for meetings and stuff like that, just so that Matt doesn't have to do that, right? So having a guy like the door,
yes.
So having a guy like Bisaccia, who players, I haven't heard a player say a bad word about Bisaccia. I mean, the guys with the Raiders loved him and all that stuff. Yeah. So I'm sure that helps out a lot. And again, the guys that he's using on special teams, Eric Wilson, who ends up playing on defense, right? McDuffie was that guy for a while too, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. These guys are improving and being able to contribute on the defensive side because they're getting reps on special teams and they're having to do things like open field tackle and stuff like that. And it's not the old Green Bay under like Drayton and stuff where like they're just like, well, Ty Summers is under contract and so we have him for 4 years and we don't care.
Linebacker body, he's a special teamer.
Right, exactly. Like they have actual demands in terms of what they need to do in the protection and coverage units and they're for the most part executing on that. I understand the Bears had a weird return. Cool. I don't think you fire a guy over that game. Like,
yeah, no, but that was my point at the start there, though.
That game didn't even matter.
Exactly. In a game that didn't even matter. However,
Josh Jacobs didn't play like the second half.
barely, like, I don't think he played at the end of the first half, but like
Right.
in the last regular season game, and then you have a fumble on special teams the next game in the playoffs, which again, I don't put that on Bisaccia either, but those are the lasting images, right? That's what most people will remember.
What do
heading
you
into the
think
offseason.
Bisaccia told Keyshawn to drop the ball?
No, of course
Come
not.
on.
That's my point. This is my point.
Right.
This is what
It's
drives
hard
me
plastic
nuts.
hit a football. Weird things happen when that happens.
And he should have gotten the recovery anyway.
Yeah.
Now you got me all wound up.
Sky
Well,
cam.
I will be linking to the article in question from Justis in the description of this video. Always appreciate the time, man. I'll be at the Super Bowl next week, but hopefully I'll still get to chat with you. And then hopefully a couple weeks, I'll see you at the combine, if God willing.
See you soon.